All right, in this particular lesson, part of the lesson, we are going to do some review from geometry. And in geometry, you learned about 30, 60, 90-degree triangles, and 45, 45, 90-degree triangles. And both of those are going to be used with the unit circle here. So if we start off with 30, 60, 90-degree triangle from geometry, you may recall that 30, 60, 90-degree triangle came from an equilateral triangle where all three sides were the exact same length. Okay? And then what you did was you drew an altitude that split that 30, 60, 90-degree triangle exactly in half, and the original triangle, since all three sides were equal, all three angles were equal, and then this split that angle at the top into two equal angles, so those were now both 30-degree angles. So here's where your 30, 60, 90-degree triangle actually came from. Okay? And then if we allowed the one small side of the 30, 60, 90-degree triangle equal x, then obviously the entire distance here, because this distance here would also be x, the entire distance would be 2x, which makes this side also 2x, and this side also 2x, because the big triangle, all three sides were equal. Okay? And then what you did in geometry was you said, okay, well, we could come up with what this third side was equal to. So we let that equal y, and then we just did a Pythagorean theorem. Okay? So what you did was you said, on this small triangle here, the 30, 60, 90-degree triangle, you said, well, let's let x squared plus y squared equal 2x squared. And then we needed to solve this for y. We wanted to know what that side length was. So we said, well, let's let y squared equal, and we brought the x squared over, and we squared this. So this is 4x squared minus x squared. So y squared equal 3x squared. Took the square root, so y equaled the square root of 3x squared, but then the square root of x squared was x, so y equaled x times the square root of 3. Okay? So since y was equal to x square root of 3, what we had here was we had a rule for a 30, 60, 90-degree triangle. Okay? And actually, let me draw it the other way to match the triangle that we have here. Let's actually draw it this way. So here's our 30, our 60, and our 90. So the one side here was x, the diagonal here was 2 times x, and then the altitude here was y, but we just found out that y was x square root of 3. So now you had a rule that allowed you to generate sides of all three parts of the triangle. Now, for our purposes, with the trig, our hypotenuse here is always going to be 1. Okay? And I'll tell you why a little bit later when we get to the other side. If the hypotenuse is 1 and this hypotenuse is twice as big as this small side, then you would have to divide it by 2 to find this side, so this would be a half. Because if you double the half, you would get 1 when you went back this way. Okay? So now if this is a half, and this side is x times whatever square root of 3 is, well, if you multiply 1/2 times square root of 3, or square root of 3 over 1, then that makes the side square root of 3 over 2. Okay? These are going to be the three sides of a 30, 60, 90-degree triangle that we're going to be using for the trig. So you're going to really, really, really want to get to know that across from a 30-degree angle is 1/2, across from a 60-degree angle is square root of 3 over 2, and across from a 90-degree angle is 1. Okay? And we'll be using that a lot in this particular unit. Okay? The other triangle that you studied in geometry a lot was the 45, 45, 90-degree triangle. So in that triangle actually came from a square where you had all 90-degree angles, And then what you did was you drew a diagonal through that, which then broke these up into 45-degree angles there. So you had a 45, 45, 90-degree triangle. And we know in a square that all these sides were equal. So then what we did was we said, well, let's let this side be x, and then that side also has to be x. So two sides are x, and then we said, well, let's find out what that last side of that triangle needs to be. So again, we used the Pythagorean theorem, and we said, let's let x squared plus x squared equal y squared. So this got us 2x squared equals y squared. And then we had to take the square root to get y by itself. So it's the square root of 2x squared. And then you take the square root of x squared, which gets you x, but you can't take the square root of 2, so that's just square root of 2 equals y. So that remaining side is x times the square root of 2. So you had this general rule where this was x, a 45, 45, 90-degree triangle, and the remaining side was x times square root of 2. Okay? And then you were able to find all kinds of sides. If this was 4, this would have to be 4, that would be 4 square root of 2. Okay? But for our purposes, again, our diagonal, our hypotenuse on all our triangles is going to be 1. So in this particular unit. Okay? So this is going to be 1. This is going to be our 45, 45, 90-degree triangle. So we know that both of these sides have to be the same, okay? And if the hypotenuse is 1, to go from here to there, we're going to have to divide by that square root of 2, because normally when you go from here to there, you multiply, so in the reverse, you have to divide. So we're going to take 1 and we're going to divide it by square root of 2. But we know you can't leave a square root in the denominator, so we're going to rationalize this. We're going to multiply top and bottom by square root of 2, which gets you square root of 2 over 2. So this side of the triangle is going to be square root of 2 over 2, and this side of the triangle is going to be square root of 2 over 2. Okay? So you really, 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 and I can't say that enough, need to make sure that from all of this, you know that across from a 30 is a half, across from 60 is square root of 3 over 2. On this one, across from 45-degree angles is square root of 2 over 2. Okay? So you need to know those pieces of information. 30 gets you a half, 60 gets you square root of 2 over square root of 3 over 2, and a 45 gets you square root of 2 over 2. You need to know that, and you just need to memorize that because we're going to be using that a whole lot. Okay? As far as where those measurements came from, this is what you learned in geometry, this and this. You don't need to know that for now. Just need to be able to use this piece of information there. Okay? So I'm going to get rid of this. And this. So that's the important information. Okay? Now, the other thing that you spent some time in geometry was SOHCAHTOA. And SOHCAHTOA is your trig ratios. Okay? And the trig ratios are based off of right triangles. You need to have a right triangle in order to use SOHCAHTOA.